I am Adrienne Balcazar, and I would like to introduce the LCAP-State and Federal Programs Unit. Joining us today is Debbie Cano, Laurel Estrada, Augustine Garcia, Rachel Garcia, Jeannie Keith, and Anita Lomeli. Also joining us today is April Grease and Susanna Mendoza. To access today's presentation, we ask you to click on the link in the chat, and this will take you directly to the slides. If you use the link at the top of the slide, this will take you to our Canvas page. The presentation can be accessed through the icon as shown here, as well as the agenda and the resources. Today's topics for this meeting will be the instructional continuity plan, the eligibility for the 25-27 Williams monitoring. We have our FPM update, and we have our Title I rank and serving requirements. We also will review the LCAP update, looking at all the topics of local indicator timeline, required actions, and the pre-review support reminders. So again, we have a full agenda, so welcome. We ask you to place your questions in the chat box, and we will answer any simple questions if we can, but we will follow up with a written response in a Q&A that will be emailed to you all. We are also recording today's training, and we will post this on our webpage as well. And now, Rachel will begin by sharing about the instructional continuity plan.
Thank you, Adrienne. Good morning, everyone. So as Adrienne mentioned, in this section, we'll be taking a look at the requirements for the instructional continuity plan. So as you know, every kindergarten through grade 12 school is required to develop and maintain a comprehensive school safety plan that's designed to address campus risks, prepare for emergencies, and create a safe and secure learning environment for students and school personnel. And so Senate Bill 153 amended Education Code 32282 to require schools to include an instructional continuity plan as part of the Comprehensive School Safety Plan beginning July 1st, 2025, in order to establish communication with pupils and their families and to ensure access to instruction during a natural disaster or emergency. This requirement to have an instructional continuity plan included with the school safety plan by July 1st, 2025 will be verified for compliance through the LEA's annual audit process beginning in 2025-26. And so there are two components that must be included in the instructional continuity plan. The first component involves procedures for pupil engagement as soon as practicable, but no later than 5 calendar days after the emergency. And this protocol must include procedures for two-way communication with students and their families, and also procedures to identify and provide support for students' social, emotional, mental health, and academic needs. So when developing this component of the instructional continuity plan, it's important to consider your existing methods of communicating with students and their families, and how these methods could be impacted during an emergency situation. The second component that must be included in the instructional continuity plan is a plan to provide access to in-person instruction or remote instruction as soon as practicable, but no later than 10 instructional days after the emergency. And so it's important to keep in mind that plans for remote instruction must align with independent study requirements specified in Education Code. And it will also be important to consider how students will access instructional materials and resources in a remote environment. Form J13A is used to obtain approval of attendance and instructional time credit in the event of an emergency when one or more schools were closed, when schools were kept open but experienced a material decrease in attendance, or when attendance records have been lost or destroyed. And so beginning in fiscal year 2026-27, Form J13A submissions due to a school closure and/or material decreases in attendance will require an LEA to certify that it has a locally adopted comprehensive school safety plan that includes an instructional continuity plan. And so LEAs must also certify that it has offered student engagement and instruction consistent with its instructional continuity plan. If it has not provided engagement and instruction consistent with its ICP due to extenuating circumstances, then the LEA must describe the circumstances that prevented it from doing so. And it must also explain what student engagement, services, and instruction it did provide to support its students during or immediately after the period of closure or material decrease in attendance. And so again, this requirement for Form J13A, it doesn't apply until fiscal year 2026-27. So keep in mind for fiscal years 2024-25 and 2025-26, the requirement to include an independent study plan and independent study certification form with Form J13A submissions, it remains in place. So here we see a timeline that summarizes the key dates that were just shared on the previous slides. And so as mentioned, the Instructional Continuity Plan, or ICP, it must be included with the school safety plan by July 1st. And compliance with this requirement will be verified starting in 2025-26 through the annual audit process. And then again in 2026-27, approval of Form J13A submissions will require LEAs to certify that they have a locally adopted comprehensive school safety plan that includes an instructional continuity plan. So as required by statute, the CDE posted ICP guidance on their website on March 1st. And so here we have the link to this webpage at the bottom of the slide, and you can see a screenshot of it. And so included on the CDE webpage are practical considerations, best practices, planning resources, also information related to compliance with this requirement. And then they just added a link to the recording and slides from their guidance webinar that took place on March 24th. And then it also looks like FAQs are coming soon to this webpage. And so that concludes this section. So I will now turn it over to Debbie.
Thank you, Rachel. So now Anita and I are going to share some information regarding Williams monitoring. Next slide. So the new list for the 25-27 schools that are eligible for Williams monitoring was just hot off the presses April 7th. And so this letter, as shown on the screen, was sent to LEAs with this information. And if you are wondering if you're on the list, the link right there at the bottom of the screen or the slide is there with the current list that was just published. Next slide, please. So eligibility criteria for Williams monitoring. On the slide, we have this publication that was from the CDE. The schools that are eligible for Williams monitoring are schools that are eligible for CSI under ESSA, those that are eligible for ATSI under ESSA, and then those schools with 15% or more of their teachers that are not clearly credentialed. And just to note that schools that are dashboard alternative school status or DAS schools are excluded from Williams monitoring. And now Anita is going to share the details regarding each of the criteria for eligibility. Anita?
All right, well, thank you, Debbie. So eligibility criteria in relation to CSI and ATSI are as follows. Schools that are eligible or were eligible for CSI or ATSI on the 2023-24 ESSA assistance file are eligible for Williams monitoring. Now, access to this file is linked here for your reference. as you will be able to find which school or schools in your LEA had CSI or ATSI eligibility that particular year. Now, if your school most recently exited CSI or ATSI on the 2024-25 ESSA assistance file, first and foremost, congratulations, but please note that you are still eligible for Williams monitoring because all schools that met eligibility for CSI or ATSI in the previous year, 2023-24, will stay eligible during this 3-year cycle. Now, if your school was newly identified as eligible for targeted support and improvements, TSI, in this 24-25 ESSA assistance file, you are not eligible for Williams monitoring. That is, unless your school was eligible for CSI or ATSI in 2023-24 and you exited, but now most recently became eligible for TSI. In this case, your school would continue to be eligible for Williams monitoring. And this can be confusing and hard to keep straight. So on this next slide, the intent of this chart is to help clear up any of that confusion. So to reiterate, any school that was eligible for CSI or ATSI on the 2023-24 ESSA assistance file is eligible for monitoring under the Williams settlement legislation. Williams monitoring will follow a 3-year cycle beginning in the 2025-26 school year all the way through the 2027-28 school year. If you were eligible for ATSI in 2023-24 and either continued to be eligible for ATSI or you're now eligible for TSI, or you exited ATSI, you continue to be eligible for Williams monitoring. Likewise with CSI, if you were eligible for CSI in 2023 and either continue to be in CSI, eligible for CSI, or now you're eligible for TSI, or you exited CSI, you continue to be eligible for Williams monitoring for the duration of the 3-year cycle. If you were not eligible for any ESSA determinations in 2023-24, but now you find yourself that your school is eligible for TSI, you are not eligible for Williams monitoring in this 3-year cycle. The next criteria for Williams monitoring eligibility is teacher credentialing. In the 2022-23 academic year, any school with 15% or more of the school's teachers not possessing a valid and a clear or preliminary teaching credential may be eligible for inclusion on the list of schools eligible for Williams monitoring. So the formula used is as follows. The number of teachers that had a teaching assignment and possessed a valid and a clear or preliminary credential on census school day or school census day in October, divided by all of the teachers that had a teaching assignment on census day, regardless of whether or not the credential they possessed at the time was valid for their teaching assignment or if it was clear or preliminary. Once divided, the number is multiplied by 100. And if this percentage is 85 or less, then the school is eligible for Williams monitoring. So let's take another look at the teacher credentialing data in a chart form. Here we see 3 examples of teacher data presented. In the first sample, 23 out of 27 teachers with a teaching assignment possessed a valid and a clear or preliminary credential for their assignment on census day. 23 divided by 27 is 85.18. That is to say that 85.18% of the teachers at this school did have a valid credential that was clear or preliminary for their teaching assignment. By subtracting that percentage from 100, it is determined that 14.82% of teachers at this school did not have a valid and a clear preliminary credential for the assignment they were teaching on census day. And since the 15% or more threshold was not met, this school is not eligible for Williams monitoring based on the teacher credential eligibility. On the other hand, the second school example shows that 78.95% of teachers held a valid and a clear or preliminary credential on census day. Subtracted by 100, we see that 21.05% of teachers were without a valid and a clear preliminary credential for their teaching assignment. This school is eligible for Williams monitoring based on teacher eligibility and will be monitored in the 25-26, 26-27, and 27-28 school years. Debbie?
Thank you, Anita. So that was a lot of information, but as I stated earlier, if a school was a dashboard alternative school status on the dashboard or DOS school, they would be excluded from Williams monitoring. And so if you're wondering, well, were we a DASH school? Did we have a DASH school in 2023? The link is right there for you if you are wondering if you're on that list, and we made that easy for you. And any further information about DOS eligibility is also linked here for you. Next slide, please. So this is a lot of information, and we certainly don't expect you to memorize it all. We've put therefore we've put all of these links together of additional information. If you have any questions regarding Williams, there's an overview of the background of the Williams case. Again, the link to the current list, a link to the letter that was sent out, and then the issues covered by Williams, the instructional materials, facilities, teacher misassignment. And there's also a link there for any of our charter school friends, how this affects charter schools. Next slide. And lastly, your Los Angeles County Office of Education Williams support is provided. And here's a screenshot of the web page with the different contacts of the 3 branches of the support, which would be teacher assignment, instructional materials, and facilities. And now for most of our audience, we understand that your roles are more likely linked to the instructional materials. And so our colleague, Francisco or Frank Jimenez, is happy to answer any of your questions, and his contact information is there on the slide. And so now Adrian will share some FPM information.
Thank you, Debbie. Good morning. So today we're going to give an FPM update and really all we know thus up to this point in time about the 25-26 FPM reviews, and then we'll cover a little bit about the equipment inventory process. So refreshing our memories about the federal program monitoring review cycle, this is the FPM cycle that's scheduled by the school year. So you can see the first column is the 24-25, and we know right now wrapping up are the cohort C with the online reviews and cohort A. They're also with the online, and the cohort C is with on-site. So they're wrapping up their reviews this year, and then looking forward to the 25-26 review schedule. Up for review for online review is cohort B, and cohort D is for on-site. So what we know thus far is that in about 2 to 3 weeks, we will the districts will be notified by CDE, and that's kind of what they've told us, is that it's been pushed. It was supposed to be earlier, but it should be coming out in May. So at the same time, when you do get your notification, what will happen is in May, a letter will be sent to the superintendent. At the same time, the posting on the CDE compliance webpage will also notify, and that will take place in May. Also, too, this email that's sent to the superintendents and the charter schools will be asking the LEAs to complete a web-based scheduling and information request. So at this point, then the superintendent will state who is the designated FPM review coordinator for the FPM review. And you will also include other information such as your calendar for next year. And this is so that they can coordinate the dates of the review for next year. They definitely don't want to schedule a review when perhaps you are all on spring break or winter break. And the sooner that all districts and charters submit the survey, then the sooner CDE will be able to let the selected LEAs know what date their FPM review is, what sites, and what programs will be reviewed. Also in June, the schedule of the FPM instruments will be coming out, and that'll be posted on CDE's compliance monitoring webpage. Once the instruments are posted, you can begin informing and training your staff responsible for the implementation of the various programs being reviewed, and also the collection of the evidence that you will need to submit to CDE. Lastly, we want to remind you that CDE will be conducting a virtual FPM training this year. Different than in the past, it will be held over a 2-week time frame, beginning on Wednesday, July 30th and Thursday, July 31st. And then they will do day 3 and day 4 the following week on August 6th and August 7th. So this hopefully will be good for, incorporating other activities that you have on your calendar, and will allow everyone some time in between to gather if they have any questions and so forth. And at this point, you would want to invite all of your district and site level staff to attend this training. And based on the date of your FPM review, you'll want to work backwards plan in order to ensure that you meet the deadline of submitting all your evidence 30 days prior to the date of your scheduled FPM review. And also, we always say for anyone else who's not selected for an FPM review, it is important for you to know what evidence is required within these instruments and for these programs. And so we also suggest that you should annually train your district and staff responsible for the implementation of the programs and the collection of evidence. It's really important that you have a process in place so that if you are selected, it really doesn't matter, because you will have this system in place that it's just a matter of gathering all the information and evidence. And now Laura will share about equipment inventory.
Thanks, Adrienne. Spring is a great time to look closely at your LEA's systems, routines, and procedures related to equipment inventory and management. So let's go over some considerations. There are some key points to address in your system for keeping track of equipment and maintaining control, as well as ensuring proper use of equipment that's purchased through federal funds. In subsequent slides, we'll provide examples and resources to support your work. LEAs must maintain an inventory of all equipment valued at $500 or more, including equipment placed at private schools. You must conduct and maintain documentation of a physical check of your equipment minimally every 2 years. And you need to reconcile the results of that physical check with your official LEA equipment inventory list and complete any necessary follow-up. Equipment inventory management is a key requirement for federal programs. On this slide, you'll see the federal programs that are monitored for equipment management and their FPM instruments. The equipment management requirement in California Ed Code is linked to this slide for your reference as well. The documentation that must be maintained includes a historic inventory of equipment purchased partially or entirely from federal funds and evidence of physical equipment checks. It's important to include any items that can easily walk away, such as Chromebooks or iPads. It's also important to have a written procedure for equipment management. It should include the process for the physical checks, reconciling the results, and the system for tagging equipment. The requirement for equipment management is explained in the Code of Federal Regulations and linked to this slide. As a reminder, it's not enough to have a policy that documents systems, routines, and procedures. It's important to also have systems in place to provide training and complying with them and monitor whether they're being followed. It's also helpful when staff understand the why for processes and procedures. This slide contains all that needs to be included in an equipment inventory. Since there can be variances in different programs, it's important to understand the requirements for each federal program to ensure that the system in place is inclusive of all that is needed for compliance. A link to the FPM instruments is at the bottom of this slide. In the subsequent slides, we provide samples of equipment inventories and management systems. Labeling or tagging equipment properly is an essential part of an LEA's procedures that are in place to guard against loss. This is an example. Proper tagging of equipment also facilitates the process for conducting regular physical checks. You can see that this equipment tag provides an opportunity to identify which federal funds were used to purchase the equipment, along with other data that relate to the written inventory. CDE provides this example of an equipment inventory spreadsheet. You'll see how the required components are represented in this spreadsheet and used to track items purchased through Title I Part A funds. It's important to remember that equipment and supplies located at private schools must be labeled with the LEA identifier and included in inventories and physical checks as they remain the property of the LEA. A link to an editable Excel version of this particular inventory is included on the next slide and on our LACO Canvas page. The links included here are editable versions of sample inventories. They're organized by program, FPM instrument, and the format they're created in. The first link is to the example reviewed in the previous slide. The next three links are provided by CDE for specific federal programs, including Title I, Title III, and Expanded Learning. The last link takes you to a Word file that could be used as an inventory for various programs. As you reflect on your system for keeping track of federally funded equipment, consider how your LEA's control system is set up to prevent loss, damage, or theft. How does the LEA determine what equipment is needed for the implementation of your program? How does the LEA determine if other unused equipment is available prior to using federal funds for additional equipment? And how does the LEA ensure that equipment purchased with federal funds is used only for the authorized purpose? Remember, if equipment is lost, damaged, or stolen, you must investigate and document. To wrap this up, I began by saying that spring is a great time to re-examine your LEA's systems, routines, and procedures relative to equipment inventory and management. This slide contains some suggested spring tasks. Are your inventories and written procedures current? Are they understood by all who have a role in carrying them out? When was the most recent physical check? What's the plan for equipment storage over the summer? How are physical checks and inventories reconciled? How is that reconciliation documented? Every LEA has its own system of completing this work. When that system is documented and everyone involved knows their role and fulfills it, your LEA will successfully maintain ongoing compliance. And with that, I'll hand things off to Augustine.
Awesome. Thank you, Laurel. Good morning. Happy Thursday, everyone. So this morning, I'll be going over Title I, ranking and serving. But wait a minute. So if you attend all of our meetings or watch them on YouTube, you might be wondering, well, didn't Agustin cover rank and serve back in November? And if you're thinking that, you're right. I did. And that's because co-allocations are documented in the Winter Con app, which is why we prep for that in November. But schools need to be notified of funding at the beginning of the year, or better yet, before the beginning of the school year, so they can develop their 25-26 SIPs and budgets. Remember, we can't use the funds if the plans and budgets aren't approved first. So let's first review what ranking and serving is and why it's a critical part of the Title I program. So ranking is a process that districts must use annually to identify high poverty schools that are eligible for Title I services. There are several sources of allowable data to use for this process, but in most cases, it's free or reduced price meal data. It's the most accessible, and it's the most commonly used by districts. The numbers are based on students ages 5 through 17 because that's what's used for Title I allocations. Serving is the next step. Based on that ranking, districts must determine which schools will receive Title I funding and be served in the coming school year. Now, we say districts because this typically doesn't apply to charter schools because LEAs with less than 1,000 students or single school districts are not required to rank. So the question you may have is, why do we have to rank schools? So the purpose of ranking is to ensure Title I funds go to schools with the highest percentage of low-income students. And all the rules, well, they push you in that direction. So let's review the rules for ranking and serving. So schools must be ranked based on poverty percentages using consistent data for all schools. Schools with free and reduced price meal percentages at or above the district average poverty percentage are identified as eligible for funding. And schools with greater than 75% poverty must be served before other eligible schools. Now, districts may fund any secondary school with at least 50% poverty before serving other eligible schools with lower poverty percentages. If funding remains after serving these schools, all other eligible schools must be ranked in order of poverty. Schools may be ranked district-wide or by grade span, and districts are not required to fund all eligible schools. Funding for each funded school must be sufficient to support a program of adequate size, scope, and quality to ensure a high likelihood of success in closing the achievement gaps. If any school below 35% poverty is served, then the per low-income student amount for all funded eligible schools must be at least 125% of the LEA allocation per eligible low-income student. And here we have some reminders about some other funding requirements. The first is that 85% of your whole Title I allocation must be used at Title I schools for direct services to students. Direct services are services where the student is the primary recipient of the services. This has been described as including parent engagement and professional development activities related to instruction. And then the per pupil amount, or PPA, for school allocations may vary by school, but only if the PPA for higher poverty schools is higher than the PPA for lower poverty schools. And there are some exceptions that can be applied to these ranking rules. The first exception is the grandfather option, and this is if you have an eligible school that was funded in the prior year and is now ineligible, you may fund them for one additional year. You can carry them for an additional year to help them draw down the Title I program. Another exception is if a school is below the district poverty average and at or above 35% poverty percentage. You may serve that school as long as all schools with higher poverty have been served. And then there's a feeder pattern exception, and this is for secondary and middle schools. If you determine that you'll get more accurate poverty data by using data from feeder schools, you may use this method to determine the poverty percentage for your secondary schools. So what can you do now? You can use certified CalPADS free and reduced price meal 2024 data to determine school poverty levels. Use the ranking rules to determine if any schools currently funded will be ineligible next year, if any new schools will be eligible, and what cutoff point will the district use for serving eligible schools. And once the schools have been identified, estimate the 25-26 school level funding amounts using a minimum 85% of the current year funding. Title I hold harmless in most cases maintains LEAs with 85, 90, or 95% of the current year funding. Provide schools with estimates for planning purposes so SPSAs and budgets can be developed for the coming year. And tell schools that these are estimates and they should prioritize needs based on their needs assessments so they can add or cut back on services if there's a significant change in funding. Keep in mind that adjustments can and most likely will happen throughout the year. And Title I estimated entitlements are usually posted in August, and based on this, districts can update schools on funding amounts and have them consider any changes needed to their SIPSs. Allocations are often updated in the fall, and if these are significant, schools should be notified and changes made as needed. In February, The CONAP is released with the final entitlements and school allocations are documented. And then for FPM purposes, school plan budgets are reviewed based to determine if they match the CONAP school allocations. But this isn't the end. Entitlements are updated throughout the year, so funding amounts can change at any time. To avoid that excess carryover, schools should be informed of changes and plans updated. So let's talk about other factors that can affect your school level funding. First is transferability. So that's the process of transferring money from Title II or Title IV over to Title I. You'll need to decide whether or not you'll transfer funds into Title I, because if you do, how will they be used? Will they go to specific sites, or will they be reserved for district services to Title I schools? Then there's carryover. Here, we're looking at any unused Title I funds from this year that can get rolled over to next year. Will those funds stay at the sites, get pooled, or be reserved for district services? Once you've got your carryover squared away, it's time to adjust those school allocations. And finally, we have some bottom line questions for you to consider about whose needs are being met by your ranking decisions, students or the adults in the system. Are you ensuring that your highest poverty schools are receiving adequate funding to implement effective programs to really close any achievement gaps? Are you notifying schools in a timely manner to allow them to develop a thoughtful, comprehensive plan? If so, then you're likely focusing on those student needs. Now that concludes my section, and now I'll hand it off to Jeannie for our LCAP update.
Thank you so much, Augustine, and good morning, everyone. We'll start the LCAP update with looking at the local indicator timeline. And so this is a reminder about the local indicators timeline and the connection to the annual LCAP review and approval process. As you know, during the 24-25 school year, LEAs have been collecting and analyzing information locally to update their self-reflection tools for each of the local indicators. An LEA must report the data that it collected and analyzed to its governing board using the SBE adopted self-reflection tool. This report must be presented as part of a non-consent item at the same meeting at which the LEA adopts its LCAP by July 1st. And so the LEA's designated dashboard coordinator will then report their local indicators via the mycdeconnect.org during the reporting window, which closes August 1st. And we want you to please note that on August 15th, the dashboard shuts down, and then it requires LEAs to reset their dashboard coordinator on August 18th. Then, following the COE approval, the county office approval of the district LCAP, or the adoption of the charter school LCAP, the designated dashboard coordinator will upload the COE approved LCAP in the window noted in October, which then you can see on the timeline is followed by the dashboard release, which comes out this year on November 15th. All right, so we're going to take a little bit of time this morning to talk about some supports for your LCAP process. And so here on this slide, to support your LCAP process, a self-review guide for the 25-26 LCAP is available to help you and your team address the multiple components and requirements in the LCAP section. So you'll find versions for both districts and charter schools linked on our LCAP resources page, and you can see those links on the slide. And here, each guide is provided as a Google Sheet, so you'll be prompted to make a copy for your own use. We encourage LEAs to share the self-review guide with those educational partners that are closest to the work, so they are familiar with the information is collecting for the local plan. Their familiarity with the components that are required for the instructions provides them with clear expectations for what they will be sharing for actions, metrics, and expenditures, especially in areas for which they have oversight. On this next slide, we take a look at how the self-review guide is organized. For each section in the LCAP template, the self-review guide includes 3 columns. The first outlines instructions from the LCAP template. The second is for self-review notes. Here, LEAs can gather and review input from those closest to the work to ensure it addresses what is required. LEAs can input their own notes. They can input, yes, no, this was required, what questions they may have, where there's pending information. This is really intended to be a self-review section to support the LEA to get to address all of the requirements that are noted on the left. And then the third column provides some key information and resources to support each component of the LCAP effectively. Next slide. So the self-review guide is offered to provide a rubric for the LEA to use as they collaborate with educational partners to reflect what they are including in the LCAP. And so this is a Google format. It includes sheets for each LCAP section. The LEA might consider sharing the guide with multiple users to allow different people to take ownership for parts of the plan, as well as to be clear on what is required. So the work can be developed and reviewed collaboratively and aligned to the requirements. This approach may allow for stronger, more meaningful input from the people who are actually closest to the work. Additionally, the sheets offer a separate section for required actions, which outlines what must be included. And finally, the Google format offers user-friendly navigation. And so the tabs at the bottom make it easy to move back and forth between sections without getting lost in the complete LCAP document. So one of the features offered in the self-review guide is a clear goal separation. You can see where the star is that a separate tab for each goal can support the LEA to develop and reflect on each goal while involving feedback, again, from those who are closest to the work in that goal. This helps ensure meaningful progress with each goal being supported by people who have firsthand knowledge, offering valuable insights and analysis. So LEAs can duplicate the goal sheet and rename each sheet to align with the specific goals in their LCAP. This approach is intended to promote deeper analysis, again, allowing those directly involved to provide meaningful input and to use the components in the guide as a rubric. Finally, this process encourages a collaborative effort where the person holding the LCAP or writing the LCAP isn't working alone, but can gather feedback and insights from others to make the plan stronger and to address all of the requirements. So next, I'm going to share a few areas where the guide clarifies multiple components that are required to be addressed in a specific LCAP prompt. And so here on the slide, we're looking at the plan summary section in the LCAP template. And on this slide, the screenshot clarifies 4 components that are required to be included in the prompt called Reflections, Annual Performance. So there are 2 distinct years of data and requirements that need to be addressed in the prompt. The first requires the LEA to reflect on annual performance using the 2024 dashboard and local data. Additionally, based on the review of the 2024 dashboard and local data, the response needs to include any successes and challenges identified during this year's LCAP development process. These 4 components are included on the left in the teal box. The next component addresses the red indicators that were indicated on the 2023 dashboard in 3 categories. These categories include any school within the LEA that received red indicators for all students, any student groups within the LEA that received red indicators, and the third, any student group within a school within the LEA. These red indicators were identified last year in the LCAP, so the LEA is repeating the 2023 dashboard indicators in this year's plan. It's important to note that the LEA is not required to indicate levels of red indicators for the 2024 dashboard. However, that might be included as part of their reflection on the 2024 dashboard. So let's continue on, still looking at the same prompt. Now we're looking at the next 2 components that are about Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant funds. All LEAs need to indicate if they will have unexpended LREBG funds for the 25-26 school year. This applies to LREBG funds that were previously apportioned and have not been fully expended. This does not apply to any new funding that may be apportioned through the Budget Act revisions in the May revise. For LEAs with unexpended funds, the LEA must identify the 4 components included on the slide. And these include the goal and action number, explanation of the rationale for selecting the action, how the actions are aligned to the allowable uses of LREBG funds, and how the action is expected to address areas of need of students and schools identified in the required needs assessment. So that was a lot of information. You're probably like, oh my goodness. So because in that one prompt, there's multiple components that need to be included, it may be helpful to include the headings that are offered on this slide. This can support LEAs in addressing the components, and it can provide clarity for readers of the LCAP. So this is offered as a consideration. Moving on, we're going to take a look at the next set of slides that provide reminders for specific required actions in the LCAP for 25-26. Included here are actions that are required based on specific criteria as applicable to the LEA. So first are the criteria to be addressed for LEAs eligible for equity multiplier funding. For these LEAs, actions must address the lowest performance level on 1 or more state indicators on the dashboard. It is important to note that the equity multiplier focus goal is an annual goal that must reflect the current year dashboard data or lowest performance level when dashboard data is not generated. Next are actions for LEAs eligible for differentiated assistance. These LEAs must include specific actions related to their implementation of the work underway as part of the differentiated assistance process. Last on the slide are actions required for LEAs with remaining LREBG funds. Multiple components are required. Among them is identifying that the action is an LREBG action. And for your reference, you'll find a sample for an LREBG and DA action among the resources included on the LCAP Canvas page. Right, included next on this slide are the required actions for English learners and long-term English learners. For each of the student groups, 2 components must be addressed in the actions. These include actions related to language acquisition programs for ELs and actions for professional development addressing needs of English learners. For LEAs with 15 or more long-term English learners, they must also include actions related to language acquisition programs for LTELs, long-term English learners, and actions addressing professional development, addressing needs of long-term English learners. As LEAs think about how to support English learners and long-term English learners, it is important to recognize that there is no single EL profile and no one-size-fits-all approach will ever meet the needs of all these students. Within the EL student group itself, we see a wide range of needs. For example, long-term English learners require specific and targeted support that is vastly different from what recently arrived students or newcomers need. LTELs benefit from language acquisition programs tailored to their unique needs, especially focused on developing proficiency in academic English. That's why teachers working with LTELs must also receive targeted professional development to equip them with strategies that address these challenges. As you can see on the slide, we've outlined the 4 distinct components designed to ensure that both language acquisition and teacher support are aligned with where students are in their English development for English learners and for LTELs. How does your district address this? What does it look like in your LCAP? And how is it documented to show this level of responsiveness to EL diversity? Our next slide was provided from our MOS unit here at LACO, and this slide highlights multiple resources that are designed to help educators better understand and support English learners, including long-term English learners. These tools offer practical strategies, self-assessments, and curated lists of effective programs and websites that bring the EL roadmap's principles to life. The goal is to help LEAs make their policy actionable, meaningful, and accessible in their efforts to teach and advocate for English learners and long-term English learners. Next, building on the key principles from some of these toolkits, this slide highlights some important considerations for both language acquisition program and professional development actions for long-term English learners. And this is offered as a consideration. We'll finish up with looking at the additional item in the required actions sheet in your review guide. Finally, as a reminder, the required actions sheet identifies the actions required in the LCAP that are addressing the lowest performing indicators, also known as the REDs, from the 2023 dashboard. As mentioned earlier in the presentation, these should not be confused with REDs from the 2024 dashboard. In the self-review notes section, it may be helpful to document which actions specifically respond to the 2023 dashboard REDs. And in wrapping up this section, we want to remind you that we are here to support you with your LCAP development process. And for districts, we are currently in the middle of our pre-review process, where we review partial and complete LCAP drafts and then provide written feedback using an LCAP checklist and follow up with district LCAP contacts. Additionally, the self-review guide that we've discussed today is available to help guide your district work. For charter schools, while you are not part of the pre-review process at LACO, we are here to support you. You have access to the Charter School Self-Review Guide, as well as an invitation to attend our office hour to discuss the Self-Review Guide. This office hour will be held on Thursday, May 8th at 10 a.m. And additionally, at this office hour, we will also provide specific support for any charter schools eligible for CSI. And now I'll hand it off to Adrian for some important information about upcoming deadlines.
Thank you, Jeannie. So as our meeting wraps up this morning, we have some reminders with some upcoming deadlines that include the CMDC reporting closing on April 30th at 11:59 p.m. Remember, no apportionments will be made without the submission of this report. Also, the UPK expenditure report number 6 is due by May 31st, 2025. For Proposition 28, we have the annual certification that is open May 1st through June 30th, and the annual report is due May 1st to September 30th, 2025. We also included the reminders on the LCAP, the local indicators, and the instructional continuity plan. And lastly, the CalPADS end of year 1, 2, 3, and 4 official submission is May 6th through the 25th. 2025, with the certification deadline on July 25th, 2025. Our next state and federal program directors meeting and our last one for this school year will be on Thursday, May 22nd. We also ask at this time if there's anyone that is planning to retire or promotions, anything like that. If you would be willing to share that in the chat, either to everyone or to one of us, then we can definitely celebrate you at our next meeting on May 22nd. There's also questions in the chat. And before you log off, please take a moment to share your feedback, any feedback that you may have. We carefully review all the feedback and use your suggestions to improve our future sessions. We truly appreciate any input you can provide. And again, we want to thank you today for joining us. We are ending a little bit earlier, so I guess it's a gift of time that we are giving you. So again, please take the time to complete the evaluation for today's meeting. Have a great, day. Thank you.